The church bells tolled, their somber notes slicing through the crisp autumn air. But Sawyer's heart pounded louder, drowning them out. At 13, he'd stood in that same pew, eyes wide, as Father Michael's voice boomed with divine authority, promising salvation to all but him. By 17, he knew the truth. The man the town called a saint was a monster cloaked in holy robes. Sawyer Bennett leaned against the oak tree on the hill overlooking St. Augustine's Church, the heart of Willow Creek, Virginia. The town revered Father Michael, the man who'd adopted him after his parents' car accident left him orphaned at 10. To the congregation, Michael was a beacon of compassion, a widower who'd taken in a grieving boy and raised him in the shadow of the cross. But Sawyer knew better. Behind the altar, in the dim sacristy, Michael's hands had wandered where they shouldn't, his whispers cloaked in scripture but dripping with something far darker. Sawyer had been 13 when it started, too young to name the sin, too scared to speak. Now, at 22, Sawyer was no longer that trembling boy. He'd grown into a man with sharp cheekbones, ocean blue eyes, and a quiet intensity that drew glances from strangers. Yet the weight of those years clung to him, a shadow he couldn't shake. He'd left Willow Creek for college in Richmond, hoping distance would bury the past. But the church's pull was relentless. Michael had summoned him back for the annual Harvest Mass, a grand affair where the town would fawn over their saintly priest. Sawyer had no choice but to return, not out of love, but to confront the truth. The hill was his refuge, a place where he could breathe away from Michael's gaze. He tugged his navy sweater tighter against the evening chill, his dark hair falling into his eyes. Below, the church glowed under the setting sun, its stained glass windows casting kaleidoscopic light across the lawn. It was beautiful, deceptively so, a facade hiding the rot within. "Hey, you okay?" a voice called, soft but steady, pulling Sawyer from his thoughts. He turned to find Ethan Harper, the new choir director, climbing the hill. Ethan was 23, with golden hair that caught the light and warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through Sawyer's defenses. He wore a tailored gray coat, a cream scarf loosely draped around his neck, and moved with an easy grace that made Sawyer's chest tighten. Ethan had arrived in Willow Creek 6 months ago, a music graduate from Boston, and his presence had stirred something in Sawyer, a spark he hadn't felt since he was a kid dreaming of escape. "Yeah, just thinking," Sawyer said, his voice low, betraying the storm inside. Ethan sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "This place gets to you, doesn't it? All that history, those expectations." He gestured toward the church, his tone gentle but probing. Sawyer nodded, his gaze fixed on the steeple. "It's not the place. It's the people." One person. Really, Ethan didn't push, but his silence invited confession. Sawyer wanted to spill everything, the shame, the fear, the nights he'd spent scrubbing his skin raw, tried to erase Michael's touch. But the words caught in his throat, heavy as lead. Instead, he asked, "Why'd you come here, Ethan? Small town like this. It's not exactly a music mecca." Ethan smiled, a soft curve that lit up his face. "I wanted somewhere quiet to figure things out. Boston was too loud, too fast. Plus, I heard the choir here needed saving." He nudged Sawyer playfully. "Didn't expect to find you, though." Sawyer's breath hitched. Ethan's words were light, but his eyes held something deeper, something that made Sawyer's pulse race. For a moment, the weight of the past lifted, replaced by the warmth of Ethan's presence. Their hands brushed, and Sawyer didn't pull away. The touch was fleeting but electric, a promise of something he'd never dare hope for. Below, the church doors swung open, and Michael appeared, his black cassock stark against the golden light. Even from a distance, his presence was commanding, his silver hair and broad shoulders giving him the air of a prophet. The townsfolk gathered, their voices rising in admiration. Sawyer's stomach churned. "He's not what they think," Sawyer whispered, more to himself than to Ethan. Ethan followed his gaze, his expression darkening. "I've heard rumors. Nothing solid, but people talk. About him. About you." Sawyer stiffened. "What kind of rumors?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That you're troubled. That Michael saved you from yourself. But I don't buy it. You're not the one who needs saving." Sawyer's heart pounded. No one had ever seen through the town's narrative. Not like this. He wanted to tell Ethan everything, to unburden himself of the secret that had festered for nearly a decade. But fear held him back. What if Ethan didn't believe him? What if the town turned on him, as it had when he dared to question Michael's authority as a teenager? Before he could speak, the church bells rang again, signaling the start of the evening service. Ethan stood, offering Sawyer a hand. "Come on. Let's get through this together." Sawyer took his hand, the warmth of Ethan's grip grounding him. As they descended the hill, the church loomed larger, its shadow swallowing the light. Sawyer knew tonight would be the beginning of something, whether salvation or ruin. He couldn't yet say. Inside, the pews were packed, the air thick with incense and anticipation. Michael stood at the altar, his voice resonating with practiced warmth as he welcomed the congregation. His eyes found Sawyer, a flicker of something unreadable passing over his face. Pride? Possession? Sawyer's skin crawled. Ethan squeezed his shoulder, a silent anchor. Sawyer clung to that touch, letting it steady him as Michael's sermon began. The words were familiar: love, forgiveness, redemption, but they rang hollow. Sawyer's mind drifted to the sacristy, to the moments after services when Michael would call him back, claiming to need help with the vestments. The memory made his hands clench. As the service ended, Michael approached, his smile wide but his eyes sharp. "Sawyer, my boy," he said, loud enough for the nearby congregants to hear. "It's good to have you home." Sawyer forced a smile, his voice tight. "Good to be back, Father." Michael's hand lingered on his shoulder, a touch that felt like a claim. Ethan watched, his jaw tight, and Sawyer knew he wasn't alone in seeing the truth. The question was whether he'd have the courage to expose it, and what it would cost them both. The Harvest Mass was a spectacle, a celebration of Willow Creek's faith and Father Michael's legacy. The church buzzed with energy, families in their Sunday best filling the pews, their faces glowing with devotion. But Sawyer felt like an outsider, a ghost haunting a place that no longer belonged to him. He sat near the back, Ethan beside him, their knees brushing in the cramped pew. The contact was subtle but grounding, a reminder that he wasn't alone. Ethan's presence was a lifeline, but it also stirred something dangerous, a longing Sawyer had buried deep to survive. He glanced at Ethan, whose eyes were fixed on the altar, his expression unreadable. Did he sense the tension coiling in Sawyer's chest? The memories clawing their way to the surface? Michael's sermon was a masterclass in charisma, his voice weaving tales of grace and sacrifice. He spoke of the prodigal son, a story that felt pointedly aimed at Sawyer. The congregation hung on every word, oblivious to the man behind the myth. Sawyer's gaze drifted to the sacristy door, half hidden behind the altar. His throat tightened. He could still feel the cold wood of the vestment table, hear Michael's whispered assurances that this was God's will. "You okay?" Ethan murmured, his voice barely audible over the organ's swell. Sawyer nodded, but his hands trembled. He shoved them into his pockets, focusing on Ethan's warmth to keep the memories at bay. He wanted to tell Ethan everything, to shatter the silence that had imprisoned him for years. But the risk was too great. Willow Creek was Michael's domain, and the truth could destroy more than just Sawyer's fragile peace. After the service, the congregation spilled into the churchyard for the harvest festival. Lanterns glowed in the twilight, casting a warm light over tables laden with apple pies and cider. Children laughed, weaving through the crowd, while adults clustered around Michael, eager for his blessing. Sawyer hung back, watching as Michael played the part of the benevolent shepherd. It was a performance honed over decades, one Sawyer had once believed. Ethan nudged him, holding out a cup of cider. "You look like you need this." Sawyer took it, their fingers brushing. "Thanks," he said, his voice rough. "You don't have to stick around. You know, this isn't your fight." Ethan's eyes softened. "Maybe not. But I'm here anyway." The words hit Sawyer like a wave, stirring a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to reach for Ethan, to close the distance between them, but the weight of Michael's gaze stopped him. The priest was across the yard, laughing with a group of parishioners, but his eyes flicked toward Sawyer, sharp and possessive. "Let's walk," Sawyer said abruptly, needing to escape. Ethan followed, and they wandered to the edge of the churchyard, where the noise faded and the stars began to emerge. The air was cool, scented with pine and wood smoke, and for a moment, Sawyer could breathe. "Tell me about you," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Not the version this town knows. The real you." Sawyer hesitated. No one had ever asked for that. "Not really. I don't know who that is anymore," he admitted. "I used to think I could be someone else. Someone free. But this place, it takes pieces of you." Ethan stopped, turning to face him. "You're still here, Sawyer. You're still you. And you're stronger than you think." The sincerity in Ethan's voice cracked something open in Sawyer. He wanted to believe it, to believe he could reclaim the parts of himself Michael had stolen. But the fear was a living thing, coiled tight around his heart. Before he could respond, a shadow fell over them. Michael stood a few feet away, his smile tight. "Sawyer, I need a word," he said, his tone pleasant but edged with steel. "Alone." Ethan's jaw tightened, but Sawyer nodded, his stomach twisting. "I'll catch up with you," he told Ethan, who hesitated before walking away, glancing back with concern. Michael led Sawyer to a quiet corner of the churchyard, out of earshot. "You've been distant," he said, his voice low. "I raised you, Sawyer. I gave you everything. And yet you look at me like I'm the enemy." Sawyer's pulse raced. "Maybe you are," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Michael's eyes narrowed, but his smile didn't falter. "Careful, son. This town loves me. They won't take kindly to lies." The threat was clear, and it sent a chill through Sawyer. He wanted to scream the truth, to expose Michael's sins to the world. But the town's devotion was a wall he couldn't breach, not yet. As Michael walked away, Sawyer's gaze found Ethan across the yard, his silhouette framed by lantern light. For the first time, Sawyer felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. But hope was a dangerous thing in Willow Creek, and he knew the cost of truth could be more than he was ready to pay. The days following the Harvest Mass were a blur of tension and unspoken truths. Sawyer stayed at the rectory, the house he'd once called home, but it felt like a prison. Michael's presence was everywhere, his books on shelves, his voice echoing from the church next door, his eyes watching Sawyer's every move. The town's adoration only deepened the isolation, their blind faith in Michael a reminder of how alone Sawyer had been for so long. Ethan was the only light in the darkness. They met daily, stealing moments in the town's quieter corners, a coffee shop on Main Street, a bench by the river, the hill overlooking the church. Each encounter deepened the pull between them, a magnetic force Sawyer couldn't resist. Ethan's laughter, his gentle teasing, the way his hand lingered when they brushed, it was a lifeline, but also terrified Sawyer. To want Ethan was to risk everything, to expose a part of himself he'd kept hidden to survive. One afternoon, they sat by the river, the water glinting under the October sun. Ethan wore a dark green sweater that brought out the warmth in his eyes, and Sawyer couldn't look away. "You ever think about leaving?" Ethan asked, tossing a pebble into the current. "Starting over somewhere new?" "All the time," Sawyer admitted. "But it's not that simple. This place has got claws." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "You don't have to face it alone. You know. Whatever it is you're carrying." Sawyer's chest ached. He wanted to tell Ethan the truth, to let the words pour out like a flood. But the fear was too strong, the memories too raw. Instead, he reached for Ethan's hand, their fingers intertwining. The touch was bold, reckless even, in a town where eyes were always watching. But in that moment, Sawyer didn't care. Ethan's thumb brushed over Sawyer's knuckles, a silent promise. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. The moment was shattered by a voice calling Sawyer's name. Clara, a longtime parishioner, approached, her face tight with concern. "Father Michael's looking for you," she said. He seemed upset. Sawyer's stomach dropped. He squeezed Ethan's hand before letting go, the warmth fading too quickly. "I'll see you later," he told Ethan, who watched him go with worry in his eyes. At the rectory, Michael was waiting in his study, his expression cold. "You've been spending a lot of time with that choir director," he said, his voice clipped. "People are starting to talk." "Let them," Sawyer snapped, his anger flaring. "I'm not a kid anymore. You don't control me." Michael's eyes darkened, but his tone remained calm. "I raised you, Sawyer. I gave you a home, a purpose. And this is how you repay me? By flaunting your indiscretions." The word hit like a slap. Sawyer's hands clenched, his voice shaking. "You don't get to judge me. Not after what you did." Michael's face didn't change, but his silence was deafening. For a moment, Sawyer thought he'd pushed too far. But Michael only smiled, a chilling curve of his lips. Be careful, Sawyer. You don't want to lose what little you have left. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sawyer left the study, his heart pounding. He needed to get out, to breathe, to find Ethan. But as he stepped outside, he saw Clara watching from across the street, her expression unreadable. The town was Michael's, and Sawyer was running out of time. That night, he met Ethan at the hill, the church looming below like a silent judge. I can't keep doing this, Sawyer said, his voice breaking. He's everywhere. I can't escape him. Ethan pulled him close, his arms strong and steady. You don't have to. We'll figure this out together. Sawyer buried his face in Ethan's shoulder, the scent of his cologne grounding him. For the first time, he let himself believe it might be possible, not just to survive, but to fight. But the path ahead was treacherous, and the truth would demand a price neither of them could yet fathom. The air in Willow Creek grew heavier as the days passed, the town's idyllic facade cracking under the weight of Sawyer's resolve. He was done hiding, done letting Michael's shadow dictate his life. But the truth was a blade, and wielding it meant cutting through the town's faith, their trust, their very identity. Sawyer wasn't sure he was strong enough until Ethan. Their moments together became bolder. Stolen kisses behind the library, hands clasped under the cover of dusk. Ethan was a revelation, his courage infectious. He'd grown up in a city that embraced him, but he understood Sawyer's fear, the suffocating grip of a small town's judgment. You're not alone in this, he'd say, and Sawyer clung to those words like a prayer. One evening, they sat in Ethan's small apartment above the music shop, the walls lined with vinyl records and sheet music. Ethan played a soft melody on his guitar, his fingers deft and sure. Sawyer watched, mesmerized, the notes weaving a spell that dulled the pain. You should write a song about this, Sawyer said, half joking. About us, Ethan grinned, setting the guitar aside. Maybe I will. But it'd be a sad one if you don't start fighting back. Sawyer's smile faded. I want to. But it's not just about me. If I speak out, they'll tear me apart. And you, Ethan leaned closer, his eyes fierce. Let them try. I'm not afraid of their whispers, but Sawyer was. He'd seen what happened to those who challenged Michael, a teacher fired for questioning his authority, a family ostracized for doubting his charity. The town protected its saint, and Sawyer was just the troubled boy he'd saved. The breaking point came at the Sunday service. Michael's sermon was on forgiveness, but his eyes locked on Sawyer, a silent warning. Sawyer's hand shook as he sat beside Ethan, the congregation's murmurs a constant hum. He could feel Clara's gaze, her suspicion growing with every glance he shared with Ethan. After the service, Michael called Sawyer to the sacristy. The room was as he remembered, dark, cramped, the air thick with incense and memory. Michael closed the door, his expression unreadable. You're testing my patience, he said. This attachment to Ethan. It's unbecoming. It's dangerous. Sawyer's blood boiled. Dangerous? You don't get to talk about danger. Not after what you did to me. Michael's face hardened. You were a child, Sawyer. You misunderstood. I was guiding you, teaching you. Stop, Sawyer snapped, his voice echoing in the small room. You don't get to rewrite this. I was 13. You were supposed to protect me. Michael stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. And I did. I gave you a home, a family. Without me, you'd be nothing. Sawyer's vision blurred with rage. He wanted to scream, to tear down the walls of this cursed room. But he thought of Ethan, of the life they could have, and he held back. This isn't over, he said, turning to leave. Michael grabbed his arm, his grip bruising. Don't make me regret saving you. Sawyer wrenched free, his heart pounding as he stumbled out of the sacristy. He found Ethan waiting outside, his face pale. What happened? Ethan asked, his voice tight. Sawyer couldn't speak, the weight of the confrontation choking him. But Ethan's hand found his, and the touch was enough to keep him standing. They left the church, the town's eyes burning into their backs. Sawyer knew the truth was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. Sawyer's decision to fight came with a cost he hadn't anticipated, the town's slow but relentless rejection. Whispers followed him, on Main Street, in the diner, even at the gas station. Troubled, they called him. Ungrateful, the boy who'd turned his back on their saint. Ethan faced it too, his choir director role now a topic of scrutiny. He's too young, they said. Too liberal, but Ethan never wavered, his hand steady in Sawyer's when the world felt like it was closing in. They began to plan, meeting in secret to gather evidence. Sawyer had kept a journal since he was 13, hidden in a box under his old bedroom floorboards. The pages were raw, filled with the pain and confusion of a boy betrayed by the man he was told to trust. Reading them now, Sawyer felt both shame and strength. This was his truth, and it was enough to start. Ethan suggested they find others. You can't be the only one, he said, his voice gentle but firm. The idea terrified Sawyer, but he knew Ethan was right. Michael's influence was vast, but no one was untouchable. They started with Clara, whose suspicion had turned to curiosity. Over coffee at her small house, Sawyer told her everything, his voice shaking but steady. Clara listened, her face pale, her hands clutching her mug. I always wondered, she admitted. He was too perfect. No one's that good. Claire knew of others, boys, now men, who'd left Willow Creek abruptly, their families tight-lipped. She gave Sawyer names. Daniel, now in Richmond. Lucas, in D.C. Sawyer reached out, his heart pounding with every call. Daniel was hesitant but agreed to meet. Lucas's voice broke when Sawyer mentioned Michael's name. I thought I was alone, he whispered over the phone. The meetings were painful, each story a mirror of Sawyer's own. Daniel, now 30, had been 15 when Michael's guidance turned dark. Lucas, 25, had fled at 17, his parents believing Michael's lies over their son's truth. Together, they formed a fragile alliance, bound by shared pain and a hunger for justice. Ethan was Sawyer's anchor through it all. One night, as they lay on a blanket under the stars, Sawyer confessed his fear. What if we fail? What if they choose him over us? Ethan pulled him close, his lips brushing Sawyer's forehead. They might, but we'll have each other. And the truth. The words gave Sawyer courage. But the town was closing ranks. Michael's sermons grew pointed, his talk of loyalty and betrayal a clear message. Sawyer felt the walls closing in, the air thick with suspicion. He and Ethan were careful, But the town's eyes were everywhere. Then came the breakthrough. Clara found an old letter in the church archives, written by a former altar boy who'd left in the 90s. It was vague but damning, hinting at Michael's inappropriate affection. It wasn't proof, but it was a start. Sawyer clutched the letter, his hands shaking. This was real. This could end it. But Michael wasn't blind. He summoned Sawyer to the rectory, his face a mask of calm fury. "You're digging where you shouldn't," he said. "Stop now, or you'll regret it." Sawyer stood tall, his voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Michael's smile was cold. "You should be." As Sawyer left, he knew the final battle was coming. He and Ethan were ready, but the cost would be high. The town's faith was a fortress, and tearing it down would mean tearing apart everything Sawyer had ever known. The confrontation came on a Sunday. The church packed for the annual All Saints Mass. Sawyer stood at the back, Ethan beside him, their hands clasped tightly. Daniel and Lucas were there too, their faces resolute despite the fear in their eyes. Clara had spread the word, and a handful of others had joined, former parishioners, skeptics, those who'd always suspected but never dared speak. Michael took the pulpit, his voice booming with righteous fervor. But Sawyer saw the cracks, the slight tremble in his hands, the way his eyes darted to the back of the church. He knew they were coming for him. As the sermon ended, Sawyer stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his resolve unbreakable. "I have something to say," he called, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The congregation turned, their faces a mix of confusion and curiosity. Michael's smile faltered. "Sawyer, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," Sawyer said, his voice steady. He held up the journal, the letter, the testimonies of Daniel and Lucas. "You call him a saint, but I know the truth. I was 13 when he first touched me. He used his power, his faith, to hide his sins." The church erupted in gasps, whispers, cries of disbelief. Michael's face paled, but he raised his hands, his voice calm. "These are lies from a troubled boy. I've only ever tried to help him." Daniel stepped forward, then Lucas, their voices joining Sawyer's. "He did it to me too," Daniel said. "And me," Lucas added. The congregation's murmurs grew louder, doubt creeping into their faces. Clara stood, holding the letter. "I found this in the archives. It's not just them. There are others." The room was chaos now, voices rising, some defending Michael, others demanding answers. Sawyer's eyes found Ethan's, and the strength there kept him grounded. He'd expected to feel fear, but all he felt was freedom. Michael's facade cracked. "You're destroying everything I've built," he shouted, his voice raw. But the congregation was turning, their faith shaken. Some walked out, others wept, but the truth was out, and it couldn't be undone. In the weeks that followed, the town unraveled. Michael was suspended. An investigation launched. The evidence was overwhelming. Sawyer's journal, the letter, the testimonies. The church's doors closed for the first time in decades. Its stained glass dark. Sawyer and Ethan left Willow Creek, moving to Richmond to start over. The scars remained, but they were healing, softened by Ethan's love and the knowledge that they'd fought and won. The town would never be the same, but neither would Sawyer. He'd reclaimed his voice, his truth, and the man he loved. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through their new city, Ethan squeezed Sawyer's hand. "You did it," he said, his eyes shining. "You're free." Sawyer smiled, the weight of the past lighter than it had ever been. "We did it," he corrected. And for the first time, he believed it.